Glad everybody is out here today. A little bit different tour today. We're doing the Arboretum staff favorites, which I have to admit is we had our big fundraiser this past weekend. So I had scheduled this tour as a cop-out because then everybody else could tell me what to say on our staff, because we have wonderful plants people, very knowledgeable plants people all up and down the staff. However, I didn't take into account the fact that all of our staff would also be very busy, and so they may not get back to me with their favorite plants until, say, Monday evening before the tour. So I don't have a handout for y'all, but we're going to go through and I'll talk about the plants and tell why people like them. And it's very interesting when I was getting these responses, because different people like the plants for different reasons. Some they just like the plants, some it's memories associated with them, some it's memories associated with the Arboretum. So very interesting. And we'll hit some plants that I've talked about on other tours and some plants that I probably haven't talked about. So it should all be fun. Like always, I'd love to get your feedback on plants, even if I say it's somebody's favorite. Chris and Barbara are the only ones on staff here who on the tour. So if you say those plants you think are dogs, that's all right.
Won't hurt our feelings, right, Barb?
Everybody from Chicago, so they got thick skins. They can take it. So this will be some input from several of the staffs. I did leave Tim, for those of y'all know Tim, our research technician. I told him I didn't want his favorites because he does tours of his own sometimes. He's the backup for the Plantsman's tours, so he gets to talk about what he wants to talk about at other times. So we don't have him. All right, well let's jump right into it then. We're gonna come across the parking lot and talk about the plants. All right. Our first plant is one of Chris's favorites. And I agree with him. I love this plant. It's a Euonymus. So those of you who know burning bush or our native hearts bursting Euonymus, may not see the similarities here. This is a tree, those are shrubs. But some Euonymus can get very large. It can be 50, 60 foot trees. Euonymus carnosus is grows pretty quickly as a young plant. Really nice shape, beautiful foliage. This nice kind of leathery dark green leaf. It's just coming into flower now, so all these buds are opening up. You can see this is one that's open, so it's nice, especially against the dark leaves, but not, it's kind of got that greenish tinge to the flower, so it doesn't pop like a bright white like our native dogwoods. Like most Euonymus, it's pretty tough. It'll tolerate some tough conditions. I've grown it in pretty deep shade and it did well. Here, obviously, bright sunlight, a pretty stressful location. You got parking lot, got a lot of reflected heat, a lot of reflected light. It's doing very well. It does make the typical Euonymus fruits, little reddish fruits that pop open and have the bright red-orange seeds inside. Very showy when it's in flower. But as Chris points out when he was telling me why he likes the plant, it's the fall colors why he grew this plant. I mean, it's great and it's tough and it's a beautiful small tree, but the fall color is absolutely spectacular. Euonymus carnosus.
How big will it get?
Maybe 25 feet in the landscape. I'm not 100% certain on that. This is the largest one I've seen. They've got a pretty good sized one at the Arnold Arboretum, but I've never actually put my eyes on it, so I'm not sure how big it is. It's always difficult to tell. The wild may be a little bit larger, but Euonymus carnosus. But so in the fall, from relatively early fall, as soon as weather starts dipping, the foliage turns a gorgeous, gorgeous, deep burgundy. And it's this glossy leaf, so it's a real glossy burgundy color. And that color lasts and lasts and lasts. Here, through December isn't uncommon. Where I grew it in a milder climate in coastal Virginia, it was almost evergreen with that burgundy foliage almost all the way through the winter. A really striking plant in the fall. So questions about the Euonymus carnosus? Chris, you want to add anything since this was one of your plants?
Love it. I have two, and unfortunately deer ate them this spring.
less propagated.
But they're coming back.
Is that a typical growth pattern for it?
It takes a little bit of training to get a single trunk head tree. Although when I've grown it, typically I've gotten seedlings. If you're growing them from seed anyway, seedlings is big and they'll shoot up pretty quickly with a central leader, but they'll start branching low unless you take care of them, limb them up, like a lot of trees. I think this baby came from the same source where I got my first trees. Arnold Arboretum did a distribution of them a few years ago, quite a few years ago now. But just a really nice small tree. Other questions or comments? Scale. Great question. I have never seen Euonymus scale on this plant. And I've never seen waxy scale on this plant. Never. Every time I say that, I feel like I should start looking because I'll probably see it, but have never seen. And that I thank you for bringing that up because that's with Euonymus. That's always an issue with scale, and I've never seen on this. And the tree forms of Euonymus tend to have fewer problems with the Euonymus scale than the shrubby and ground covering and vine types.
I don't think we've seen anything go after it, have we?
No. Typically with Euonymus, its scale is about the only real pest, and so far.
Availability?
Availability. Check with our plant sales, and maybe you'll if we grow some out. It's not available. It is one. We work the Arboretum very closely with the nursery industry, and I took a group through. We showed them some different plants that I thought had commercial potential, and this was one of my plants, and they didn't bite on it. I need to bring them back in the fall when it's in color, but.
Do you know where we got it?
Probably from the Arnold Arboretum, but I'm not 100% certain of that. Other questions? Native to China.
What about propagation?
Propagation, fairly easy from seed, from cuttings, not too bad either. Did you do yours from seed or cuttings?
Mine were seedlings. I've tried to do it from cuttings in the propagation workshop, and
no luck.
They haven't even pretended to do anything.
Okay.
I think I heard Jason from Duke Gardens did them from cuttings one time.
Yeah, I've rooted them. Trying to remember if I did them from winter cuttings or from softwood. I think I did it from softwood cuttings.
Are they fairly true from seed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Questions or thoughts? All right. Maybe we'll grow some of these out.
There won't be any
Sell.
seeds on the tree when you look tomorrow.
Okay. The next one on the list is a favorite of Faye Kuntz. Faye is the person at the front desk if you go into the McSwain. The person who greets you there with a smile every day. This is a Hydrangea quercifolia, or the native to the southeastern part of the United States. Native a little farther south than Raleigh, though. Little Honey. This is one of the compact Hydrangea quercifolias, which can get quite big, and it has this beautiful chartreuse foliage. In more sun, if you get it in sun and a damp spot, you can really get pretty bright yellow foliage on it. Really showy. Faye says she loves it because of the large oak leaf-like leaves, and you can see some of the leaves can get pretty big. On the straight species, they can get very, very large. And then you get these late spring, early summer flowers, which are quite nice. After they finish, they'll kind of turn to pink, so you get the multi-season effect from that. So a beautiful early spring color with the foliage coming out. Keeps that real nice light green, so that's nice against some of these darker plants. Faye says the reason she really loves it, though, is again like Chris with the Euonymus, is the fall color on it. And she's right. We always think of these gold leaf plants, often for their spring color, their summer color, the foliage. But in the fall, oak leaf hydrangeas typically turn a really nice burgundy, beautiful in the fall anyway. But this Little Honey, the fall color is really bright because it doesn't start from such a dark place and turn burgundy. So it really kind of pops out here in the landscape, and it is a beautiful thing. in a protected spot like this, it can be semi-evergreen, and if you look back in here, you can see some of last year's leaves still hanging on there, but it is mostly deciduous. Beautiful plant all season long, growing pretty dense shade, very drought tolerant once established. Real nice plant. Questions? Comments?
You said damp soil early. Is this been perfected to perform in damp soil?
Well, Hydrangea quercifolia really go from relatively dry soils, although in drier soils, when it's hot in the summer, they will wilt like nobody's business. They'll just look like they're dying. The next morning they'll pop back up. But they'll grow well in damp soils. They do very well in, not standing water, but in soils that are staying a little wetter, low spots. I've seen them used well in rain gardens, in fact.
How about
Deer. Deer probably eat them. I don't know. Anybody have a? I don't garden with deer, so.
I don't think it's a favorite, but they have got them before.
So they've gone after Chris's. It looks like something they'd eat.
Yeah.
Yes, anything green, exactly. Other questions or comments?
The one next to it, how hardy is the one next to it?
How hardy is this? The Hydrangea Restrada are fairly hardy. They'll grow into zone 6 certainly without a problem. I grew them in Blacksburg, Virginia, up in the mountains.
Do you need partial shade on that, or
Yeah, they're going to be better off with some shade,
some shade?
unless you're watering very frequently. Okay, just really prefer some shade. Other questions, thoughts? All right, we go around the corner to the. Okay, the next plant on our list of staff favorites actually had 2 people tell me it was their favorites. I think this is another one of Chris's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris and Nancy. Nancy does our interpretive signage, so actually she's got a sign on this plant. It's appropriate, and some of our other interpretation materials. But this is a plant that's very closely associated with the Arboretum. It's one of the what we consider our signature plants, Lagostremia fariai fantasy. Lagostremia fariai was collected. These plants were collected by the National Arboretum and Longwood Gardens in the 50s on Yakushima Island in Japan. It was a pretty rare plant on Yakushima Island and really unknown in Western horticulture for the most part. The seedlings were distributed. These are some of the original seedlings. You can see this is another one. We have the other one we have one in the Japanese garden. There was one it's down in Atlanta Botanic Garden now that was moved from here, and one in Charlotte. Charlotte, is that right?
Yep. It's in a city park.
Well, so as you can see, much larger than Lagostremia indica, the typical crepe myrtle, or the hybrids that you see with it. They're planted out here in a row, and J.C. Ralston really liked the form of this plant. Nancy, when she told me why she liked the plant, she actually directed me to an article that Viv wrote in, I think, '99 about fantasy, where she said that J.C. gave it the name fantasy because it stays slim and narrow, and he struggled with his love of ice cream sundaes and other foods. This was kind of the fantasy. It was keeping that slim, svelte shape, which I can relate to. It's been one of the plants that really has moved from the Arboretum into the nursery industry. A little bit harder to find now, just because it is a larger tree, and people are often looking for smaller plants. Lagostremia fariai has been used, especially by the National Arboretum, in a lot of their breeding efforts. If you look at the names of crepe myrtles, some of the real common ones you see now are ones with Native American names to them: Hopi, Sioux, Miami, Tuscarora, Chickasaw, a lot of those. And those came out of the breeding program with Lagostremia fariai. Now, why were they using Lagostremia fariai? 2 main reasons. One is the incredible bark on there, which on Fantasy is one of the nicest barked ones. The other reason is they have mildew resistance. They don't get powdery mildew like Lagostremia indica. So you get those traits into the other crepe myrtles and they get even better. This, I think, if you're going to plant a medium-sized shade tree for your garden, why wouldn't you get something that has incredible bark and beautiful flowers and makes such a nice tree rather than kind of a nondescript plant? The flowers, you can see flower buds are just forming. It'll flower in summer, early summer, and it lasts for a couple of weeks. It's not as long-lasting flower as Lagostremia indica, which is one of the downsides. White flowers over 2 to 3 weeks typically. But beautiful plant, and when the bark peels off, the bark exfoliates every year. It'll all peel off, and there'll be a little ring of bark around here. Just absolutely gorgeous, the colors that you get. So it kind of changes all year through as the bark changes and peels off. Here. So sometimes when you come through, it'll look really shaggy, and other times it'll look very smooth after that bark is all finished peeling off. Beautiful plant, we love it. We put this path through here just so we would go right by these trees. Questions, thoughts, comments?
Invasive?
Invasive?
The roots.
Well, you gotta be careful when you use the term invasive when you're talking about plants because people get scared. The roots will, they're roots. They will spread. It's not a deep-rooted plant. The crepe myrtles in general, you can pop them out of the ground most any time because they have that real fibrous root system. You can see on these, unlike Lagostremia indica, you tend to get a real broad flare of roots at the surface, but you can also see that not far away from the tree we're growing plants. Acanthus really suffers in dry soils. Even Summer Beauty, which is a little bit more drought tolerant, is doing just fine right under the roots of the plant. Same thing on the other side. We have a lot of plants that are growing, mingling happily with it. So not too bad from that respect, but up close, yeah, you do get that broad flare.
Bryce Lane calls that butt flare.
Butt flare.
Maybe slim,
Age?
but it has butt flare.
Pardon?
Age?
On these? Well, these are from the original 1950s collections. I believe maybe came to Arboretum in around the early 60s. I think that's what I read in Viv's article. Not sure that exactly, but so they're 50 years old, 50 plus. Other questions or thoughts? All right. Beautiful plant, right?
Yes.
There's one over there for sale.
Oh, yeah.
Only 65,
$65.
and it is a bargain. It's a nice big plant. It's a 15-gallon plant.
Mark, I bought one several years ago, and the trees just love it.
Oh yeah, yeah. The bees love it. All we can do for our pollinators is good. Need plants for them. Any questions? All right, we'll keep moving. We're gonna go back up around this way to the right. Next plant is another one from Faye, who liked the little honey hydrangea. Faye apparently likes colorful leaves on plants. She told me she loves burgundy leaves, and that's one of the reasons she likes Catinus so much. This is Catinus kagugria, this purple leaf plant. Smoke bush is commonly called. There are a lot of different forms. The species has green, kind of blue-green leaves, but there are a lot of purple leaf forms. This is one called black velvet. You see a larger one in more flower, not quite as purple leaves through these other trees out there. But black velvet's a very nice one that she said she particularly likes. She has a sucker from it growing happily in her yard. Let's see what else she says about it. She says she likes maroon plants and the smoky blooms are stunning. And you can see some of those smoky blooms. Catinus, we have a native Catinus. It's not this one. We have Catinus obovata. The Catinus kagugria makes more of a shrubby plant, often multi-stemmed. You can prune it up to a single stem and it looks very nice that way, but typically they grow as kind of a multi-stemmed plant. This one, in fact, at one point was removed and has come back. It liked its place here, so we've let it grow, anything that wants to live that much. It's, like I said, multi-stem, these rounded leaves, not terribly large round leaves, smoky blooms, or you can grow it as a cutback shrub. You can let it grow up, become big, or you can cut it back every year all the way back to the ground. And then when it flushes back out, you'll put on 6 or 8 feet of growth every year. The leaves will be darker colored on these dark leaf varieties and even larger. You lose the flowers. It won't flower for you with these kind of smoky blooms, but you will get these huge, really colorful leaves. So great for putting in a perennial border, something like that, and just cutting it back every year and using it as this tall accent with really deep color. The dark forms will green up some over the summer, but they'll still keep a pretty dark color. Beautiful fall color, brings in a lot of red undertones to the purple in the fall. Very nice. Very easy to grow. Get the best color and more sun, but they'll grow in shade. Questions or thoughts?
There's a smaller version now. Isn't there?
There are a couple smaller ones. Little Lady is one. Trying to think of some of the other ones. Little Lady's the one that sticks in my head. That was breeder in Japan that we visited. There's the Little Lady's a little bit greenish. There are some more maroon ones. There's also some gold ones, Ancot or Golden Spirit. Golden Spirit had that in the brick circle around by the parking lot. Very nice one. Other questions or thoughts? There's also some with the green leaves but dark colored flowers. Ruby or something ruby is one that's like that. All right, keep going. I will, just as you're walking by, because it's interesting, you don't always see it. This is a persimmon, and if you look at it, it's flowering now, and it's got kind of interesting flowers, little white bell-shaped flowers with a little pink lip to it. It's one of the Chinese persimmons. Okay, next plant on the list is one of Barbara's favorites. For those of you who don't know Barbara, she's our volunteer coordinator. And this is one that I do love as well. Everybody here has good taste, or we just have good plants. This is Platinus exhispanica suttneri, and really what it was selected for originally was it's variegated, and you can see this. It's especially noticeable in young plants, sometimes on the new growth, and it seems to vary from year to year. I don't know if it's the heat that makes it variegate or what, but every once in a while you get a really good year where you get a lot of variegation of this white speckling. But then most years it's more like this, where it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes the new growth you get a little bit, sometimes you get none at all. You see some variegation right there, some speckling. Not spectacular, but nice. On little plants you look at it and say, wow, that's very cool, it's variegated. But the reason that Barbara loves it is she says this white bark is a showstopper, and I agree with her. That's why I like it. It gets even brighter during the winter when the leaves drop and you look at it. It is just bright white. I mean, just like a white pillar. It'd be nice if it had been a little straighter, so we appreciate that more. But still, beautiful. Platinus are pretty tough trees. They grow, city conditions. In the wild, they grow along stream banks, so they take it wet, but they'll also take that compacted soil of urban soils. Sometimes they'll get stressed under those conditions, but they don't die. This one has proven to be pretty resistant to anthracnose, one of the diseases that often have sycamores losing their leaves midway through the summer. So that's a nice bonus. I haven't seen any trials where it's been shown, but typically a tree this size, you'll have anthracnose on it by midsummer, and really don't see that much here at all. Platinus grow fairly quickly. They'll make a large tree. But beautiful plant for bark.
It's a nice shape to it also.
It does have a nice shape.
And
And I've seen larger ones, and over time they will get a broader head like you see with a lot of other platinus, but as young plants they stay that kind of nice, narrow, pyramidal shape, which is awfully nice in the landscape. Other thoughts about it?
just come by when the leaves are off in the wintertime. It just stands out. You cannot stop.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is just gorgeous.
And we do occasionally root this and give it away, sell it, whatever. I think we had some in our plant sale this spring. So you missed your chance. Any other questions or thoughts about this or other Platinus? Other sycamores? Great sycamore. All right. Our next plant is right behind you here. Beautiful, beautiful. You can stay seated, it's okay. Japanese maple. And we had two of these weeping red leaf Japanese maples that came to us as favorites for staff members. I won't, we're not going to look at both of them, but this was the case where there were specific plants. And I'll tell you why they were favorites of people before afterwards. Japanese maples, Acer palmatum, they're our signature tree. If you look at our logo, it's a Japanese maple leaf. And these weeping forms are very, very elegant. Japanese maple's pretty tough. They'll grow sun to shade. In the wild, they're understory trees and kind of on the sides of mountains. Here they're pretty adaptable. You can move them back and forth. Once established, they'll tolerate most anything except for really constantly wet feet. They'll grow in really dry spots. You'll get leaf burn over the summer, and the health will suffer a little bit, but they'll grow. The weeping forms especially nice. You look in the literature and they'll tell you that this only gets 4 to 6 feet tall, but give it 100 years and it'll get quite a bit bigger on the landscape. This particular one is one of our directors, Ted Bilderback's favorite plants. Ted came here about a year and a half after JC started at NC State, and they kind of co-taught the nursery management and the arboriculture classes. Ted taught for the 4-year, the 2-year students, the nursery management, 4-year for the arboriculture classes. And when he got here, like as he said, he didn't really know what he was doing, and JC taught the 4-year nursery management classes. So Ted co-taught with him, took a crash course in it, and learned what he knew from JC. And JC would have Ted's classes do some different projects around the Arboretum, dig plants and move them, do things like that. This plant was dug from somebody's landscape, their home landscape, and the reason Ted remembers it so fondly, now he remembers it fondly, it's much like children. I've got teenagers now. I'm sure one day I will remember some of my experiences fondly. Now, not so much. But this was a whole comedy of errors. I mean, it's big now, but it's huge now. It was big then. It was a 3,000 pound root ball that they dug. The crane got stuck in the yard. The crane kind of tore up, just destroyed the driveway of the people who were donating it to the Arboretum. They got on the truck, trundling it over here. As it came down Barrel Road under the overpass there, it took out the top of the tree. And he finally got it in. So it was just this whole experience of bringing it here that he now looks back on fondly. But it was quite an ordeal getting it in. Just imagine digging a 3,000 pound root ball, much less picking it up and moving it over here. So whole big thing. So that's why Ted looks at it fondly. Now the other one that made the list that we're not going to go look at is a similar plant, much smaller, in the center of our Japanese garden. Ann Swallow, who does some of our plant mapping for us, also volunteers in the Japanese garden. She says she loves the plant in there because it's the centerpiece of the Japanese garden, and it really symbolizes the Japanese garden. It's this very graceful, very organic, beautiful plant, but then it really is a fairly controlled. It's not natural. You don't see these weeping laceleaf Japanese maples in the wild. This is something that's been selected over time. So the real tension in a Japanese garden is between that very natural, very organic look and the very strictly maintained and cultivated aesthetic that's in there that combines so well in a Japanese garden. So I thought that was an interesting observation to make. Questions about this or other Japanese maples? or
Age?
comments?
How old was it when you brought it here?
We say it's probably getting on towards 100, but I don't really know. I don't know if anybody knows how old it was exactly.
So it came here around 1970 or so?
1980.
Or 1980, I mean, yeah, right.
It grew in the shade, so in its youth, it went tall in order to get sunlight, which is why it's taller. But then once it was moved here, it filled out sideways. So now you've got the nice umbrella. But the pictures of it from 1980
Right.
when it was installed are very upright.
Well,
And
they,
then you can see
they
the
helped
knocked off
with that when they took it under the overpass.
One of the slides also shows the knocked off piece.
And does it? Yeah, really recovered very well from that. I gotta say, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and one of the nice things about these is they're beautiful year round. That the form is so lovely. Other questions or comments?
Not about this. I don't embarrass you to get y'all book. Tell us about this little blue at the sea. It just keeps on growing and growing and growing. Baby, do you know when it was installed?
When the first entryway was made into the garden
I mean,
in the
it's
80s.
gorgeous.
Yeah, that was
It is
early
gorgeous,
80s.
That weeping blue atlas cedar, real classic use of it, growing up on an arbor. Beautiful plant. Has wonderful color. They're really easy to grow. You can get them small ones, and you just have to train them as they're young to get them to go where you want them to go. The beautiful specimen that's grown really interestingly at the Sandhills Community College Gardens. If you ever go down there, really beautiful plant. But what do you want to know about it? It'll get huge. I mean, if you let it go and go and go, it'll go. I mean, blue atlas cedar is a big tree. So when you have these weeping forms, they'll do the same thing. They'll just keep going and going and going if you allow them to. And you can see the difference between where it's been trained to grow and where it's growing on its own up there.
Well, I thought maybe the frame had been moved out.
No,
No, that's on its own.
that's on its own.
Well, it was here, and it was good size when I started volunteering here. That was not yesterday.
Yeah, I just assume, I remember it, I do remember it as a much smaller plant when I would come visit here, I guess starting in the early to mid 90s. I remember it being here. Yeah. Now another favorite from Ann Swallow, the woman who helps with our Japanese garden, she said just lilacs in general. She grew up in New England, so anybody who's grown up north or in the mountains probably has lilacs somewhere in the memory banks of wonderful plants. We don't do a lot of lilacs here at the Arboretum. We've trialed a lot over the years and have killed a lot and gotten rid of a lot that just aren't that great. This particular one is a hybrid. It's got Syringa vulgaris, the common lilac that people think of when they think of the big lilacs in grandma's gardens in the Midwest and Northeast. This one is one from the National Arboretum. It's actually a white flowered one called Betsy Ross that has kind of the look of the common lilac, kind of the same foliage, although the foliage is much more mildew resistant than the common lilac, much more heat tolerant than the common lilac, and it has fragrant flowers, not quite as good as the common lilac. So everything is better than the common lilac except for the reason you're growing it, for the fragrance. But it is a very good plant. And they have some other ones out there. This one's Betsy Ross. They have, I think, Constitution and a couple of other ones that we haven't trialed yet, but we should, because people are always looking for lilacs, all the carpetbaggers that are coming down here from the north, which probably includes some of y'all here, right? Yeah. But yeah, this is a wonderful thing, and for those of you who grew up with lilacs, that's a good memory. So that was one of Ann's. It's just any of the lilacs. She said she comes out and she sniffs all the lilacs and brings back the memories, if not the actual experience of smelling the
Constitution white flowered?
Constitution's a purple flower. Like I said, we haven't tried it. I'm not sure of the fragrance or how it is as a plant. This Betsy Ross has been great. If it retains the characteristics of Betsy Ross, it'll be a good plant. And you can see it was a pretty heavy flower set this year. Okay, next plant on the list, Stewardia Restrada. This is another one of Nancy's favorite plants. She was one of the ones with, like Chris, who liked the fantasy crepe myrtle. Stewardia Restrada is a small to medium tree. It can grow to 40 feet tall over time, slowly, but it can get there. Their Stewardia is kind of scattered all over. They're native North American Stewardias, native to even to North Carolina. There are Chinese ones, Japanese ones. This is one from central China. One of the more delicate ones has smaller leaves than a lot of the other Stewardias. They are related to camellias, and if you look at the flowers, you can see that camellia look to it. The rounded petals, little ruffled edges, the big boss of gold stamens in the center. These are deciduous as opposed to the camellias, which are evergreen, of course. On Restrada, what's nice, most of the Stewardias are pure white. The Stewardia Restrada, you get a lot of pink in the buds, and then when they open up, you get a little bit of pink on the flowers, if you look at them, which is nice. There have been some selections that have more pink. Excuse me. Thank you. Really nice foliage, beautiful fall color, and then gorgeous bark. And that's really why Nancy says she likes it. She says it's a 4-season plant. It always looks beautiful. Spring flowers, nice clean shape and habit and foliage. Excuse me. Beautiful fall color, and then the bark, especially on mature plants, is gorgeous. Restrada is a real smooth bark, a little bit exfoliating. All the Stewardias are nice. You can see over here, this is Stewardia sinensis. As we walk by this, you can see the cinnamon colored bark. Some of the Stewardias have exfoliating bark, and you'll get pinks and greens and whites and cinnamons all in the same tree. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful plants. Questions about Stewardia?
What's the American Stewardia?
Stewardia malacadendron. It's hard to find because it's a royal pain to propagate. Seed can take many, many years to germinate. It's hard from cuttings. When you see them, you should get it. The Stewardia malacadendron has 2 to 3 inch white flowers on a much smaller plant, small and kind of thin and open and sparse. These big flowers, and then the stamens, instead of being gold like most other Stewardias, are kind of this lavender gray. They're really beautiful in there.
Do you have one here?
We don't have Stewardia malacadendron here. Probably have grown it at some point. It's a little, as the English would say, a little miffy. Where it grows, it's very happy. It's dead in other places.
What about the big leaf tree behind it?
The big leaf tree behind it, isn't that fun? Fermiana simplex. The Chinese parasol tree, is that what we have? Yeah, Chinese parasol tree. Very cool plant. Huge, huge leaves. They can get even larger than this. Big has it started flowering? The buds are coming out. Has huge paper, like Chinese lantern, like flowers. They're white and they have these big bracts on there that'll kind of turn tan over time. Really cool textural tree. It looks tropical as all get out. Smooth trunk. As you come, those of y'all come through here, if you can't see it, trunk even down to old is really green and smooth and beautiful. You may also notice under it this carpet of little seedlings. These are all Fermiana simplex seedlings, and if you don't do something about them, and by this time next year they'll be this tall and have a trunk about 2 inches in diameter. They grow so quickly. So it does seed around. Doesn't move far because birds don't move it because the seeds are large, but underneath it you'll get lots of seedlings. I've had people say, oh, it's an invasive plant. It's not, because the seeds just don't move far enough for it to be invasive. It can be kind of a pest in the garden, but that's about it. A very cool plant, isn't it? It's actually in the same family as hibiscus. Next plant on the list, Almost Aleta lace parasol. This is another one of Chris's favorite plants, and another one of the plants that we kind of consider one of our signature plants here at the Arboretum. This is found, I believe, in Orange County. That's the story I've heard, although I've heard 2 stories about it, and was moved to the Arboretum, the original plant. It's our native winged elm, but a weeping form that we named here. And you can see why it gets named winged elm. If you look at the branches, you get those little quirky wings on all the way along there, which gives it an interesting character during the winter, even an upright tree. This one is beautiful all year, but really shines during the winter. Chris says, let me get this right. It's beautiful all year, especially in winter after a snowfall. I'm trying to get people's quotes in here. And it really is that wonderful form. Very much like a Japanese maple, the Laceleaf Japanese maples in its winter form, kind of a sinuous, contorted, but then with all these wings which will hold the snow on there, it really allows for good pictures. Should look in our database for photos. It's a native. It grows happily here. Labels don't like being mowed. Makes the regular tree makes kind of a medium-sized tree, not as big as a lot of other elms, but still a pretty respectable size. This is the biggest one out there. So after however mmany years this has been here, this is as big as it'll get. I think it was about 8 feet when it was moved here. Is that
Something like that.
so? I think that's what it looks like in the photos. Beautiful bark on the trunk when it doesn't have leaves. Gets a nice kind of russet fall color. It's not show-stopping, but it is nice. It's not like in our early weather this year. It looks like it dried out and has a little bit of sun scald. I don't think it's any kind of fungal problem, but we were pretty dry and it got hot so early. A lot of people have been asking me about Japanese maples. They're seeing some of this type of thing on Japanese maples with just little spots on there, and that's really, from what I've seen, is just sun damage. Have newly emerging leaves. It's really bright, just kills off cells. Often you'll see that when you move plants in a nursery from kind of a cool, shady spot out into full sun, and they've got lush leaves that are coming out because they've been watered and fertilized. You put them out in the sun and they get a little dry, and you get that spotting on there. Questions? Comments?
I've got one of these that's really small. Will it develop a trunk like that? It's obviously a grafted product.
Yeah, it will. Was it grafted low, grafted high?
Yeah, I guess it would be grafted pretty low.
Yeah, it should. You may need to help it. It'll kind of naturally, throw branches that are up higher and keep going up, but you can work with it and get it going up, higher. But over time, it'll develop a nice size trunk. Other comments or questions? All right.
Good choice.
Sort of off the itinerary, but do you know of any American sources of these Cappadocian maples? They're available.
Forest Farm, maybe?
Where?
Forest Farm?
Okay.
You can get them online. Just Forest Farm Nursery. I'm not sure who's growing those. Okay, next tree. Another one that we're gonna have a guest speaker for this. Hey Ted. Ted's gonna tell us about our next 2 plants. He's going to tell us about his experience with this Acerbergeron, and this was one of Ted's favorites.
Well, I don't really remember exactly what year it was, quite honestly, but it was early 80s for sure. And it was getting late. It was like March, and JC had plans, and I don't remember also where this originally was, but JC had plans for the area. This tree was in full leaf, much smaller. It was about a 3-inch caliber. And so it was also going to be very difficult to dig. And so JC said, just bare root it. It's in full leaf. It's like March, and it's like bare root it. And so there's actually on the website a slide of students carrying this tree across the arboretum like this. And very much of it like a safari. And so then it was planted in here, covered up, kept watered. It does have still an injury on the trunk, which happens when you have major transport routes that are injured. And it's not so much this way in maples, but in oaks, if you cut that root, you kill whatever that branch is, the ring forest trees. The fused forest trees, it's not quite the same way, but anyway, it developed a canker on the side of it that was pretty major, and it has over the years been closing in, but we're talking about 30 years ago. So, but anyway, that's the story about that tree. And there is a picture that goes along with it.
It's a great picture. You ought to look on there. Acerbergeron grows medium-sized tree. It's a great landscape tree, good urban tree. It is pretty tough, as evidenced by the fact that probably the worst time to dig and bury a tree. March, it's leafing out. It's really going to town and dig it up, rip it out of the ground, and move it. And you can see with a combination of a tough tree and the skills of Dr. Bilderback, it survives to this day. Has grown into a beautiful, beautiful plant. You can see it's got that kind of shaggy, exfoliating bark. Tough leaves are kind of leathery compared to a lot of maples, so it's a little bit tougher. In fact, there's some evergreen subspecies of Acerbergeron, but makes a really nice, just a nice landscape plant. Get good kind of reddish burgundy fall color. Just overall a nice thing. All right, Ted, we're not going to let you go yet because the next one we're talking about are on either side of us here. These Nellie Stevens holly hedges.
You're kidding.
And
This is a favorite?
yeah, it is.
Plants are all about not just individual plants, but memories and thoughts and the associations.
This is my sweat equity, worry equity, and in case of two, blood equity. Actually, this hedge, it did continue, and at one time there were two hedges that went almost clear across. But the experience was, and there's about 5 semesters of students, again back in those early 80s, and those were the years that we had like 80 students in a class, and for me it was like 4 labs in the tree and grounds maintenance course in the spring, and between JC and myself in the 2-year and 4-year nursery classes, it was probably in that number range as well. And so these plants were all grown down in our field nursery. Field nursery is cleared down at the bottom of Fort Field Lab where the greenhouses are down there. And this was like, as I said, in the early 80s. All the topsoil from that area was over on the belt lines. it had been peeled off, scraped off, and went over on the belt line. And so what we had was B horizon clay soil down there. And there were times that you couldn't drive a nail into it because it was so hard, and there was other times it was like soup, and that's just the way it's going to be. So the kids had this great experience of getting to ball and burlap, dig with spades, 2 or 3 of them at one time, dig a root ball, and then once they got it trenched around and got some burlap kind of pinned around it, and then put a bottom lace and a top lace on it, and then did the weave around the root ball and pulled it real tight, and then broke it over and got a soil cart underneath it, and pulled it out, and put it on a flatbed trailer that we had, and pulled it up here with the C140, I believe, Armall tractor we had. Then they got to come up here, dig a hole, take that twine off, take those pinning nails out, and take the burlap off and put it in the hole. And so there are still a lot of students from those earlier years in my experience that can say, well, Joe Steele and Robert Miller and I planted one of those, and it's really the connection to the Arboretum. And there were a lot of plants, and there were a lot of semesters.
Yeah. It's a lot of plants, a lot of digging, and that's like you said, really, Nellie Stevens. But that's what's great about plants. What's great about arboretums. I know I go back to where I went to school, and I go into the gardens there, and I pick out the trees that I planted and the ones I moved and things like that. And I get a little upset when I go there, and disappeared, that kind of thing. So there is a lot of personal connections, even with what's really a workhorse plant. And the Nellie Stevens hollies are workhorse plants.
I would add that at the time this was a plant that JC was promoting, and at the time there were a lot of people moving to North Carolina, and so a lot of people didn't, on these 30-acre and quarter-acre lots, didn't want to see their neighbors. Right. And so Nellie R. Stevens was one of those plants, like Leyland cypress, that JC wanted to apologize for, but had made the green industry and has made this industry what it was. And from my perspective, it was 24 years as a nursery extension specialist. It was these kind of things that made the J.C. Ralston such a big deal among the green industry.
Yeah.
Handy dandy remedies for Nellies that remain with thin foliage, thinly foliaged, even though they're well cared for.
You can thin it out and try and get some light in there, or you can hat rack them. You can cut them back to virtually nothing, and they'll.
But no additives or okay.
Yeah, these were cut, how many years ago? Chopped right off.
Yes.
We freaked out when we came in and saw them. And look at them now.
How high did they?
They were like this. They took a chainsaw
Or
to them.
lower.
Just
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right back.
Yeah, we've taken some down on the far side of the Japanese garden in Asian Valley. We've taken those down to about 6 feet, and just stumps, and there you can't hardly tell now. That was just a year or two ago, and there's some plans to do that in some other spots. Otherwise, you get walls, too big, tall walls. Questions or thoughts?
Did we hear your favorites? I mean, hold it down to.
I do that. I do that every month.
Oh, that's your favorites.
Well, I say this is one of my favorite plants. This is one of my favorite plants.
Well, that's Tim.
Well, Tim doesn't get to do it as often, but he gets them. I let him do a tour once or twice a year,
Mark did a tour about his least favorites.
I did do a tour of my least favorites. It's the hardest tour I've done here. Could not figure out which plants to talk about. All right, next one on the list is from our newest staff member, Elizabeth Overcash, who is doing our children's programming, children and family programming. And her plants all go back to her memories of childhood. She's a horticulture graduate from NC State, but the plants that she chose have those connections that go back to her parents and her grandmother. And one of those is red hot poker. So that was one of those things that was always around, and I do remember as a child, red hot poker being a very popular plant. It was always seemed to anchor the end of these big long borders in the middle of people's gardens where I was. Big kind of nasty ugly things a lot of times. And it's a plant that went out of favor for quite a while and then has come back into favor over the last decade or so. This is the Gniphothias are from South Africa. They like lots of sun, very tolerant of dry conditions, but really they like garden conditions. They like fluffy, loose, well-drained soils and the fertility. A lot of the work has been done to get them smaller, to get the blooms to last for a longer season, get the foliage nicer. This is one called Cobra. Not sure what's Cobra-esque about it, but Cobra's a nice one anyway. Those tubular flowers that go from the lighter color to the darker color. The traditional red hot poker, it's yellow to red. These more yellow to gold to orange on here, but still very nice. And will continue to flower over a long season. You can see some that have finished flowering, the old stalks, and some that are really just getting going. So got a month or more of flower at least, and some of the newest ones are even lasting longer than that. So wonderful plants, and they're shrinking them down. You get little tiny ones, but you can still get the big old Gniphothias ruperi and some of those great big huge ones as well. Okay, another one of Barbara's favorite plants. This is Calicarpa japonica Shiji Murasaki, and this is a knockout. This was one that was new to me when I started here. We'd just gotten some young plants in the nursery, hadn't planted them out yet. We put it out. This is a beauty berry. Beauty berries Wonderful shrubs, usually grow them from the fruits, hence the name beautyberry. They grow in sun to shade. Pretty tough plants. Really think of them more as part shade plants in a lot of cases. The Shiji Murasaki, I looked at it and said, well, wow, that is really variegated. And it's kind of spattered and speckled. It's not going to be stable. And it's going to burn like crazy in full sun. Well, we don't water over here, and it's been out here in this full blazing sun and doing just fine. It gets these kind of lavender flowers, lavender stems. New growth comes out flushed with pink on the white, and then you get the white and green. Doesn't really fruit. Chris has, I think, been the only person who has seen fruit on it that I've ever talked to. He's got one fruit, white.
I think it was very light pink, and then it fell off.
So there's something about that's gotten in there that's keeping it from producing fruit because it flowers very heavily, but nobody I know who grows it has seen fruit on it. I've seen it under several names. It's often sold as Calicarpus dichotoma. It's definitely not dichotoma. It's much more of a japonica plant. A lot of confusion between those two species anyway. And I've also seen it with the name Hagoromo, which means angel's robes, angel's raiment is kind of how that translates. Not sure what Shiji means, but Murasaki is lavender, which you can see the lavender in there. And most Calicarpas, most of the Japanese Calicarpas are really kind of arching, kind of more graceful plants that way. This has been very upright, which is unusual. So not only do you have this great variegation, but then this growth habit, which is very different. Neat plant. We absolutely love it. I think it's.
Did you bring it back?
No, this. I think this came from Nurseries Caroliniana or from Hawksridge Farms, but it originally came from Japan. That's where it's from.
Was this in the connoisseur this year? Or no? Is that a different-
This year, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the first year we did it. We were gonna do it with our connoisseur plants, and the nurseryman who we got it from, it came from Hawksridge, said, we're talking with the grower. We may do something with it. I'd rather you not give it out, and so we didn't give it out. But since then we've been able to give it out. So anybody interested in our connoisseur plant program, welcome to talk to one of us, somebody on staff afterwards. We'll tell you how to become a part of that. But, get a chance to get some really cool plants that way. Questions? Scale, never seen scale on it. Not typically a large problem with Calicarpus, although they can get scale. Aphids have more of a tendency to be a problem on Calicarp. I haven't seen that on here at all.
I don't think deer like them either. I said I've never had deer eat any of my Calicarpa that I remember.
There you go, deer.
Write it down.
Chris's deer don't eat Calicarpa. That may not be the same as your deer, but Chris's deer at least
That's because he has so
anyway.
many other things to offer.
Is it deciduous?
It is deciduous, yes. Okay. Last one on our list is a favorite of Ann Porter, our development coordinator, development director. And she, let me see, I'm going to get this right, what she wrote to me on this. Ann Porter, this was actually Nancy and Ann Porter. Nancy says she likes the fall color and bark, which we'll talk about. Ann Porter likes the leaf shape and that they are really, really old, like ancient, right? Ann is becoming quite the plants person. She's not is not formally trained like many of us here, but she does know her stuff because it is really, really old, like ancient. In fact, this is a native plant. Most people think it only comes from China, but if you look at the fossil record, it was growing here, and by most definitions of native plants, they're plants that were growing in an area before the Europeans arrived, so therefore it's native, even if it doesn't grow here naturally now, at least by my definition. This is one of the most ancient trees, woody plants still growing out in nature. It's got these really interesting kind of fan-shaped leaves, and all the veins go straight out. It doesn't have a network of veins; they go straight. It's actually more closely related to conifers than it is to other deciduous flowering plants. It's in that group. This particular ginkgo biloba chichi, was selected ages ago. I can't remember if it was Japan or China where it was selected, but for these kind of protuberances that it looks almost like the whole tree is melting wax when you see it when it gets old enough. So it takes a while for it to start developing that, but very neat when it does. So you have this great bark, great leaf shape, but then the fall color. In the fall, it turns the most spectacular gold. There is nothing else in the fall landscape that turns the color of this. It is gold. It's not yellow. It is just gold. And one of the things that Bryce Lane, how many of y'all know Bryce? He's a great speaker and great observer of the garden. Something I had never really paid attention to until he said it, was that the leaves, when they drop, they all drop as one. Just boom. They're all off the tree. You have a beautiful gold tree, you go to bed at night, you wake up the next morning, and you have a gold carpet on the ground. I mean, they just, everyone goes. And the color does stay. They stay, they're gold on the tree, they don't turn brown, they never lose that wonderful color on the tree, and then when they drop, they stay gold on the ground for a while. But I live under a bunch of oaks. How many people garden under big oaks? And how long does it take for the leaves to stop falling? Never. They just keep going and going. You rake up piles waist deep. There's still, you look up and you still have green leaves on them. So trees that do this is kind of nice if you're having to get up those leaves. But otherwise, tough plant, street trees for a lot of them. Ginkgos are, they are male and female. They're dioecious. You have separate male and female. The female ones produce fruits. The fruits stink like all get out. If you can stand the smell, you can clean them, get the seeds out, and roast the seeds, and those are real tasty. But the smell would make you retch before that. So you don't want to go buy some cheap ginkgo somewhere, because you will plant it and it will be beautiful and it will grow and you'll love it, and all of a sudden it'll start fruiting and you will hate it, and at that point it'll be big enough that you're going to have to hire somebody to come in and take it out probably. So do get a named male selection like Princeton Century, or there's a bunch of them out there, but you do want to do that. Cheap is not necessarily better with ginkgos. All right, well, thank y'all for coming. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And if you want to buy a fantasy crepe myrtle, they're out in front. One.
Thanks for a great tour, Mark.
Yeah.